My name is Haim Beliak, and I want to welcome you to our home. We are going to be discussing an article that appeared in a series called Lessons and Legacies by a professor, Joanna Beata Michlic is how her name is pronounced. It's entitled The Many Faces of Memories, How do Jews and the Holocaust Matter in Post-Communist Poland. And basically, the hope that I have is that people will find the study that we might be doing over the next 5-6 sessions to be an opportunity to understand some of the issues that
Go ahead.
Some of the issues that are in front of our people when we come to talk about Poland. Many of us have been informed about Poland during its most nationalistic period, when it essentially went out of existence in the 19th century. And most of the people who understand something about that experience were our parents who had their points of view about what Poland was like. And over the long course of history, Poland is actually the country that's responsible, along with Turkey, for the survival of the Jewish people during the Middle Ages. Had it not been for the Poles, we would not be here today. And that's a difficult thing for people to understand, because what they have in front of them is the experience of the anti-Semitism. And here I want to make an important distinction. Anti-Semitism is not the same as what people experienced from 1939 to 1945. Anti-Semitism is in no way comparable to what happened between 1939 and 1945. And Jews, by and large, managed to live with anti-Semitism. So in some ways, it's important to bracket that period of time from 1939 to 1945. And to, at the same time, understand some of the issues that emerged from Jewish life. Tonight, one of my hopes is that we can begin to talk about different questions of memory. Now, the question of memory, of course, does have something to do with what is going on in Poland. But if we think about the questions of memory, it has a lot to do with what's going on in the Jewish world. And so these are not isolated one from another, but they represent, I think, a situation in which the questions of memory are central to who we are. And I want to suggest to you that sometimes memory is divorced, even completely divorced from actual history. Today in Poland, there are various streams of memory about Jews, and that includes some parts of Poland that valorize Jews and Judaism, and that embrace is often something that is something that creates some uncomfortableness for Jews as they think about the fact that the embrace of Jews seems to happen in the absence of a very large Jewish community. So I work in Poland. About 4 to 6 months out of the year, I try to be in Poland. And every morning I'm in Poland by Skype and by phone conversations and on computers. And in Poland, we have the beginnings of the resumption of the progressive movement of Poland. The word postępowa or postępowy is the word for progressive in Poland. And this is the movement of Jews that were not Orthodox, and roughly equivalent to what we think of today as Reform Judaism and Conservative Judaism combined. Most people are used to the story that misconstrues the history of non-Orthodox Judaism to suggest that somehow it began in Germany. And while indeed the movement of non-Orthodox Judaism did speak German in lots of places, it was a movement that spread throughout the Jewish world and found its most important and largest expression not in Germany, but in Poland. So by 1803, 2 years after the first Reformed congregation was started in a city called Hamburg, and Hamburg, by the way, is not technically a part of what you would call the Germanness of Germany. It is technically a part, culturally, of the Eastern European experience, just as Berlin is a part of the Eastern European experience. And so there's a good deal of...
from June.
What I'm explaining is that the cultural nature of these places was sometimes different than the political boundaries. So that in 1803, the second Reformed congregation starts in Warsaw. And metaphorically, we could probably count them exactly. The next 14 to 15 progressive congregations are in places like Lvov or Lviv, when it was under German or Austrian rule, it's called Lemberg. And in places like Warsaw, as I said, Lublin, Katowice, places that are quintessentially Polish in their cultural makeup today, Łódź, Krakow, and so forth. The sense that progressive Judaism had one geographic center in Germany is something that our movement, the progressive movement, has actually reclaimed. So today in Poland, I work with 3 communities that are considered a gmina, that is an incorporated community. They are considered a synagogue. And we have another 6 communities that are what we would in America call a chavurah. So we are all over Poland geographically. These are small communities, and they're mostly made up of people who have some sense that they're connected to being Jewish. They have a grandparent that is Jewish, has maybe told them that they're Jewish, or they discover that they're Jewish. The stories are actually quite fascinating. We are just about to publish a story that was collected by Rabbi Alan Mahler and Judy Mahler, actually written up by Judy Mahler, when they visited, of a man who came to us about 8 years ago. And he was, like the story that happened to me my first week, just in his 50s and late 50s, discovering that he was Jewish. He had been told by the oldest relative that he would not inherit the farm, and that the reason for that is because he's Jewish. He had gone to the Orthodox community and asked, what is this Jewish? And in my experience, the fellow that I met, I interviewed him my first week in Poland in the year 2010. And one of the things is that I know about, at that point I knew about 40 words in Polish. And the secretary was translating. And he told me the story of how he discovered that he was Jewish. And then he said to the secretary, I'm not even sure I like the Poshewa Żydów. Right. I'm not even sure I like. The Poshewa is measly or despicable, something like that.
the typical Jews?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
where was this? In
my office in Warsaw. And we have a very complex situation. On the one hand, what has involved me in this is that we have a duty to rescue our brothers and sisters. And that is a duty that has been ignored by the Jewish community en masse till this moment. It was not conceivable for most people that lots of people had hid their Jewish identity to survive not only during World War II, but before World War II. And people had hid their identity, of course, during World War II and in Soviet times. And then in 1989 to begin this process of being curious about being Jewish. So in part, I see some of what is described in this article in a very direct way, not with the generalizations, but with the individuals that we meet as we are building a progressive Jewish community. We're sponsored by the World Union for Progressive Judaism, the European Union for Progressive Judaism, and in its organizational structure outside of America, the World Union for Progressive Judaism has about 50% of its congregations that would be considered by American terms reform, and another 50% that would be considered in American terms as conservative. So the organizational work that I do in Poland is related to the fact that we're building a national movement in Poland.
How large are these movements?
These movements. Well, the reform movement, or the World Union for Progressive Judaism, is about 1.8 million. And
Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah. And in Poland, I would say we don't know the numbers of Jews. It sort of brings me to this suggestion by Mark Twain, who says there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. So we don't have good statistics, and we don't know really. The Catholic Church has always claimed, since about 1990, that there are 50,000 Jews in Poland. Welcome, welcome. Hello, come on in.
Into someone just drove into.
Just had an accident.
Oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
We're okay.
Yeah. Come sit down.
Thank you. Excuse us. Just drove into your.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Were you hurt?
No.
Just metal.
Well, it's just a
Metal plastic.
plastic parts today, right? It's all plastics.
I'm sorry.
To the best of my knowledge, there's only 10,000 Jews living in Poland.
Well, actually, the number 50,000 is what the Catholic Church claims. The statisticians claim that there are between 100 and 200,000 people with at least one Jewish grandparent in Poland.
That didn't hide the fact that they're Jewish.
Most of them.
He's Jewish and she's Christian. The mayor of Zakopane, everybody knows he's Jewish, but he goes for Christian.
Right.
He what? He goes.
Passes.
He denies that he's Jewish. Everybody knows. They knew his father, and so there's anti-Semitism there. Right?
So what does he say he is? Christian?
Yeah.
Or
Roman Catholic?
It's not clear that the reason that people are hiding their Judaism at this point is because of the fear of anti-Semitism. They've become a part of the culture in some ways.
Becomes habit.
And, the idea of coming out, certainly there can be people who are afraid of anti-Semitism, but there are lots of other possibilities. I just want to finish the statistics because it's complex. 100 to 200,000 that have a Jewish grandparent. 50,000 according to the Catholic Church. Until 5 years ago, the Jewish community claimed, the North American Jewish community claimed, and the American Jewish community in particular, that there were 6,000 Jews. The statistic now that's being given is that there are 13,000. Not much different than the 10 you heard. My sense is that there will be as many Jews as feel that it's safe and want to embrace Judaism. They see Judaism that is compelling. in lots of ways, that brings us back to the question of the essay, because what is now presented in Poland is a very interesting kind of Judaism that has been referred to as virtual Judaism. And some of what this article attempts to talk about are these music festivals that are all over Poland. And we see in those festivals portrayals of Jews. Sometimes there will be people who have been invited back by their former town to participate in these festivals. But more often than not, it's the locals dressing up as Jews. We find that people have a kind of an interesting time with that. My experience has been that some of those people who are dressing up are actually testing the waters. They're trying to see if they can come out.
What could you explain in the essay this thing about having a pet Jew? A pet Jew.
Yeah. I had actually wanted to bring
A little doll that you keep on your desk or something. That was not understandable. That I
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to explain it. I
Get a
have,
picture of one?
Well, you can imagine what they look like.
Yeah.
But you know, why would anybody want that?
well, actually,
It's for good luck, they said.
Yeah.
But
the reason I'm looking is that one of the things I inherited from my mother, who was from Poland, is a pet Jew, as you call it, a doll with a Jew dressed as Orthodox with tzitzit and with
Cowboy hat.
well, whatever, a strider. And so Jews and Poles from the 19th century on, this is not something that Poles invented. This is something that was shared. Jews and Poles from the 19th century began to carve these figures as good luck charms. And in every business that you go into today in Poland, you will find either the doll or a picture of a chassid, and some of them are actually quite charming. Here's some pictures of them.
But the question is, how could that possibly define luck? Luck for who, and luck represented by what? I mean, where's the luck part of it?
Well, some of them simply, there's an expression in Poland, a Jew in the house brings good luck.
That's a Polish expression.
That would be very, that's hard to understand too.
Well, no, it's not. I mean, we live in America, and we have a relationship to Native Americans, Indians, and when I was a kid, every barbershop had a wooden doll in front of it, and it was a carved Indian. And so, I think always the question to ask when we talk about Poland is this question of where have we seen this phenomena in a different form?
It certainly wasn't good luck during the Nazi occupation, having a Jew in the house.
Well, that in some
that doesn't somehow doesn't connect.
And so there's the thing. We have 1,000-year civilization. 1,000 years that Jews were in Poland, and we, because of our proximity and our lack of knowledge of history, judge the entire 1,000 years by the 6 years that happened in the Holocaust. In other words, part of what we sort of come to understand is that Poland, just as an example, is Poland disappeared for 125 years. The Polish Catholic religion became the holder of Polish identity, and later Polish nationalism, and later Polish ultranationalism. Now, I happen to know something about Jewish history. When did our claim to independence disappear? And what was the holder of our identity? Judaism. And we have also experienced, by this time, Jewish nationalism and Jewish ultranationalism. So these phenomena are not what I would call. You okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my daughter just texted me and it comes with a shofar call, so.
For 1,000 years of history, you would have thought that there would have been some inertia in the system that if there was a connection between the Poles and the Jews, considering the Jews as being separate from the Poles, as we were discussing earlier, that if there was goodwill, it would have carried forward through World War II, starting 1,000 years ago, but there never was. And
I think that just you need to hold on to those generalizations because they're fundamentally based in that period of time from 1880 to 1939. In 1863, Jews and Poles, just to give a quick counterexample, manned the barricades against the Russians, Jews and Poles together. And so there are these moments in history where Jews and Poles actually found a great sense of fraternity. And I think it's important to understand things happened and why they fell apart and the sort of the complexity of those situations. Today, and this is what I think is important, is that Poles really are in search of that past that was in the definition that was in the essay. Poland will not really be Poland until it makes, one, its peace with the very dark parts of Polish-Jewish relations, and until it acknowledges the very important parts of the history that was positive and actually spoke of the important relationships that existed between Poland and ethnically Polish people and Jews. And one of the things that Poland is beginning to do for the first time is to actually examine that history in a far more forthright manner than any other country, with the possible exception of Germany. So one of the questions is, do we assume that the anti-Semite that was hounding your mother when she left, is he waiting at the tarmac when we get off the plane? And I would argue, no, he's not. And that actually Poles don't know that much about Jews anymore. And that we have an opportunity, I believe, to aid our brothers and sisters that want to be Jewish, but also to reintroduce Judaism to Poland. That is an interesting notion that for a long time now, the last 70 years, there has not been a Jewish community in Poland that functioned as a community.
Well, I was kind of referring to the statistics given in there, who has a favorable impression of Jews. If you ask the Polish man on the street, do you have a favorable impression of Jews? And less than half say they do.
Oh, it's like 3%.
Based on what? In other words, where does this latent negative feeling come from if they don't know what a Jew is? I mean, it's...
Just from what they've heard.
Well, who they hear it
I
from.
think the problem is not with that. The problem is with that study. The study is designed to answer the questions in an American context.
Well, is the Catholic Church still preaching the fact that the Jews killed Jesus and all their problems are as a result of Judas back in the 4,000 years ago? I mean, that's basically...
Vatican II said.
I know what it says, but the question is whether they bought it.
The Polish
The local
citizens.
church doesn't have to necessarily buy into that.
So the answer is yes and yes. Parts of the Catholic Church teaches anti-Semitism. Parts of the Catholic Church abhors anti-Semitism. This is still the month of January, and every year for at least a week in most churches, this is John Paul II's innovation, there's something called a Day of Judaism or the Days of Judaism. And most of the time I'm in Poland for that. And we have meetings with priests. We have meetings with people from elder hostel, groups that are equivalent to the elder hostel or the Rhodes Scholar that we have. And these things are always oversubscribed. Whether we are comfortable with it or not, we're exotic. On one level, it's hard for us to accept that there's actually an interest in understanding what the past was. And that the 70 years of no presence has left stereotypes, because that's what's left in most societies. But when you actually talk with people, their understanding, and this is sort of the research that's being done increasingly, their understanding is that they don't know anything about Jews and Judaism. One of the things that we will look at in our seminars is probably the most sensitive issue, and that is what in history calls the Celtic pogrom. This happened on July 4th, 1946. This is after the Holocaust. And a very famous book by a Princeton historian from Poland, Jan Gross, ignited a great moment of introspection. It's mentioned in our article here, when his book, Fear, which describes the Celtic pogrom. Pardon?
Who wrote Neighbors?
Neighbors is written by the same person, but it's about another thing that happened during the Holocaust. We'll talk about that. So in the book, Fear, he describes what happened in July 4th, 1946. The movie, and I need for the good order of things to say that technically our movement is now a co-producer of the movie. The movie describes a psychologist who has spent the last 30 years of his life in Kielce and in the region, asking people to think about this event. Most of the people in Kielce, the city where this happened, aren't from Kielce. They've come, and he is responsible for, as a Polish Catholic psychologist, convening public forums where he talks with Poles about this event.
This is true?
Pardon?
This is true?
What's true?
This is,
The event?
yeah, you mentioned a film.
The film portrays his work. And so we see what happens when he goes to a Polish audience. He also has made it part of his work tracking down people that were the survivors of that event. And we see also conversations with them. And it's a very interesting...
What's the name of the film?
The name of the film is after his first name, Bogdan, and it's called Bogdan's Journey. You can Google it, and there is a 5-minute preview of the film. And what I will show you is a 20-minute clip of different parts of the film. It's actually being edited as we're speaking.
Can I interject a question? There's constant reference to a 1941 event and the exploration of that. I don't know what that event is.
If you can
Yeah,
pronounce it.
right, with a J.
Yadvabna. So Yadvabna is a place that we'll actually visit. We're going to be there on the day of the commemoration of that event. And we will be there with whoever shows up. Mostly it's Jews from Poland, Jews from Israel, and a number of Polish Catholics. One of the things I feel about travel is that it's okay to go to the museums and it's wonderful to eat the food, but if there's an opportunity to actually meet people and be a part of a conversation, that's a more satisfying thing to do than simply ride the bus.
Did the Russians have something to do with that event?
No, they didn't.
What was the event?
The event was a shortly after, in 1941, Germany attacked their allies, the Russians, the Soviets. So just to review the history real quickly, in June 23, June 21, so World War II begins on September 1, 1939. On September 17, 1939, the Soviets fulfilled their promise in what's called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement. And they had agreed to dismember Poland. And so the Russians, Soviets attacked from the east on the 17th, the Germans from the west on the 1st, and they essentially dismember Poland and leave what's called a Generalgouvernement, a kind of protectorate that's under Nazi control. 2 years later, actually 18 months later, the Germans attack in what's called Operation Barbarossa on June 21, June 22. And they drive eastward into the Soviet Union through the Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and all to the gates of Stalingrad, to the gates of the major cities in the Soviet Union.
What year is that?
1941, June 21, 1941. Almost at the exact that moment is when the systematic murder of the Jews begins. Actually, it begins in March of 41. And this is a kind of difficult thing for people to understand. Most people have thought that Hitler wrote a diary in which he said, "I'm going to kill all the Jews."
He did.
And that's what, announcing that idea is the same as doing it. From 1939, when Hitler attacked Poland, to June 21, the major target of the Nazi fury was not the Jews, it was the Poles. And we estimate that 400, 500,000 Polish intellectuals, doctors, lawyers, priests, were killed during that time. Jews, nobody shed a tear when a Jew was killed. About 35,000 Jews were killed during that period of time, from September 1, 1939 to June 21, actually March 1941. So in the beginning of the war, if it had ended on June 21, you would have to say Hitler hates the Jews, but he's really got it in for the Poles. And it's only at that late stage that we begin to understand that Hitler attacks and murders most of the Jews. By the time they get to the Hungarian Jews, there are virtually no Jews left to kill. By 1944, when they enter, by January 1 of 1944, the 6 million Jews have been killed. 5,500,000 have been killed. And that's at a time when there's very little that can be done. In this town of Yadvevna, the locals round up the Jews without the help of the Nazis in 41, without their help, and kill them. And this happened, we now believe that there were at least 3 or 4 other shtetl where this happened. And we will see a movie that tries to deal with this issue.
So you're saying it was spontaneous? not perpetrated by either the Nazis or the Russians?
Well, that's part of the debate that's described here in the essay. And this person, Jan Gross, who I mentioned earlier, the Princeton professor, wrote a book called Neighbors, in which he claims that different than what had been portrayed by the Russians, that put some of these people on trial, that organized this, that this was virtually with no involvement of the Germans. And this has become a very controversial issue. And it is an issue of great discussion. And so our going to that place to participate in the memorial, and it is going to be completely safe. Check this out and so forth. There's always plenty of police presence and so forth. It is really an opportunity to go to a place that is almost completely forgotten. And that it's one thing to go to Auschwitz, and we will go there, but we are not going to be going to one camp after another camp after another camp. I think it'll be important for us to go to a place like Yad and to talk with the survivors. There's a survivor who comes from Israel, and this coming year he's planning to come again.
So how are the Jews connected with that?
The Jews are the ones that are killed in the Yad by their Polish neighbors.
So it wasn't a totally Jewish shtetl.
No. Yad was in the center of the World War I battlegrounds, and it had just begun to rebuild itself when World War II began. And Yad was actually a small farming community. And there is a movie that was made that takes up some of the themes that are talked about in this incident of what happened at Yad called Aftermath. And we will view that because it's part of this very important process by which Poles have begun to make movies that force them to confront what happened in the past.
Now, Haim, where was the Jewish community? So you talked about that there was this progressive movement. So there must have been urban Jews living in the cities, in some professions, I would imagine, are integrated. But weren't there shtetls that were like 100% Jewish, that was like, very traditional kind of, fiddler on the roof kind of shtetls that were?
I don't think that any of them were 100% because the Jews were not allowed to be in certain businesses, and a town couldn't survive unless you had
Its population.
Yeah.
So maybe the way to answer this is that by 1939, most of the shtetl are in decline. Very few remain. The 19th century is the time, 19th and 20th century is when Jews leave the shtetl, and by the time of the beginning of World War II, 1939, 70% of the Jews, 75% of the Jews are living in cities. And so in cities like Łódź, the Jewish population was about 40%, in Warsaw 30%, in places like Lviv 30%. So Jews were rapidly urbanizing. Poland came to industrialization late, and Jews were at the center of the process of industrialization. The town that everybody knows as Łódź was in 1830 a little shtetl of 23,000. And by the 60s, 1870s. It was the industrial powerhouse of Poland, and it was almost completely a Jewish city. And so Jews were very much involved in that process of industrialization. The Shtetler were dying already by the time of World War I and continued a decline. In some ways, Fiddler on the Roof is an optical illusion because it's really about a community that's hardly there anymore.
Although, to give another example, of neighbors, my father was from a small town in Lithuania on the German border, and my grandparents stayed in Lithuania at the start of World War I when the Russians invaded. When the Germans invaded in June '41. My grandparents were killed with the help of the neighbors, because according to the history written by survivors in that area, that the Germans entered the town, asked the locals who were the Jews. They told them who the Jews were, and they rounded up all the Jews and killed them. My grandparents and my aunt.
In World War I?
World War II.
Oh.
I think that here's an
the neighbor
important
situation was applicable in countries other than Poland, I'm sure.
No, it's radically different. The Nazis are appalled at what the Lithuanians do to, quote, their Jews, unquote. The Nazis are appalled because most of the Jews in Lithuania and Latvia are killed not by the Nazis, but by the local population.
But isn't that true also in Hungary as well?
It's a little different story. It's important to tell each story separately. But in Poland, so far, we can point to 3 or 4 villages where this kind of thing happened. And what's unique about Poland is that, unlike, let's say, France, where the entire bureaucracy, the police, the people that make the city run, enlisted in the German cause with the fall of Free France and Pétain, the Poles generally did not cooperate. The police did not cooperate, with one exception that's now being written about by a man named Jan Grabowski. And he's written his first book on this called The Hunt for Jews. And he describes in certain towns the blue police working. They had blue helmets, that's why they call them blue police, working with the Nazis. But most of the Polish bureaucracy did not work with the Nazis at all. In fact, they did whatever they could to resist the Nazis. It was part of not so much protecting Jews as protecting Polish honor, to just distance yourself from the Nazis. So I want to come back to saying a little more about what happened in 1941. And one of the controversies that happened, and most of these controversies have happened since the year 2000. Every time Jan Gross or Grabowski has written a book, it has found a tremendous public interest. It is the equivalent of, the only thing I can think of in my own lifetime was what happened when the movie Roots was shown in America. It elicited a great deal of public comment. And
What was that about?
Roots,
About the blacks.
about the
Right.
passage of African
Oh,
American
roots. I thought you said roots.
Roots. So each one of these books has elicited a lot of controversy. There have been right-wing historians who've simply tried to brush it all aside, and they're not inconsequential. But what's happened here is the more interesting thing, and that is that those right-wing historians have had less sway, and that the Polish public is very interested in understanding what this history is about. When we see the movie Aftermath, which we'll have to figure out how we want to do that. One of the things that I'm going to sit in the den if it's okay with everybody. We'll watch it. The box office for Aftermath was something like 30,000 in Poland.
30,000 what?
People went to see it.
Is that a lot?
Nothing.
I was wondering why you would.
Yeah. But
Didn't seem like
the
very many.
sales of the DVDs were over 1 million in Poland.
This is closet viewing.
Well, you have to then try to understand what is the issue about going out in public to view a movie that's critical,
My neighbor might see me.
and then to take a movie like that home, assuming they get it out of the plastic and put it in the machine and watch it, which I think is
And that would be more than one person watching, probably.
probably. So the complexity of what's going on in Poland, from my perspective, really focuses us on what I think is the most important theme. Are there anti-Semites in Poland? You betcha.
What's the population of Poland now?
38 million.
Oh, 38?
Yeah. Poland is, by the way, economically, it's a remittance society. It's really Mexico, except that instead of doing farm labor, Poland is exporting nurses, doctors, technicians, plumbers, all over Europe. The people that fix things and run hospitals and nursing homes and so forth are Poles. And that's true in England and everywhere, Australia, Canada, Chicago.
And domestic.
Pardon?
And domestic.
And domestic
But
help.
it's not run like a mafia like Mexico, with the
I don't
drug lords and all.
Well, no, I don't think that Poles are, as far as I know, doing drugs. But what I'm saying,
He's talking about
people who work in one place and send their money back
yeah.
home. So the society has done pretty well because of these domestic, the large number of people who are working outside the country. Poland came through the economic downturn from 2008, and it's actually only this month that it's begun to have to deal with the fallout from the monetary realignment. And the first articles are being written about what that economic realignment means in Poland.
Does Poland have laws similar to Germany in anti-Semitic speech and stuff like that, and Holocaust denial and what have you?
Yeah.
You do have those laws?
Yeah. And it has some interesting programs that, I don't know exactly how to think about them, but for instance, most of the work on that's been done in terms of fixing up Jewish cemeteries is done by Polish prisoners.
Yeah, that was in the article. And school children.
Right.
And school children, and one of the things we will see, I mentioned it, by the way, if you got the notice this morning, I gave you the wrong date for the February thing. It's not Friday night, it's the Thursday before, February 26th. So one of the things you see is the tremendous number of people who are involved in efforts at preserving Jewish culture. And this, by the way, is often in the face of opposition from the official Jewish community.
The Orthodox community?
Yeah. In the face of what you can't really call it an Orthodox community, it's the official community. So there are about 1,200 to 1,400 cemeteries in Poland, and Jewish cemeteries. And most of them are in incredible state of disrepair. They represent a situation in which, under the Soviets, people dismantled huge parts of the cemeteries and used the tombstones for paving stones. But everywhere in Poland, where people show up, and I visit cities all over, and I have a blog post about this. If you show up, they want to know from you, can they have someone come and retrieve the tombstones? In other words, these tombstones that were used as building materials in the 50s now become a concern of Poles who want to return them to the cemetery. With the following caveat: we didn't build this. We bought the house. We're just here from some part of Poland, and we have these stones. We send somebody to pick them up. And this is, I think, part of two kinds of things that are happening in Poland. And that is that there is a sense of not so much loving Jews, because Jews are an abstraction, but a sense of Polish honor that wants to address this issue of what happened. So one of the best examples is in a book by Louise Steinman, one of the things I'm going to ask people to buy and read, called The Crooked Mirror. She describes the city where her grandmother is from, Radom. Radom was a fairly substantial city, and it had a pretty diverse Jewish community at one time. And somebody in New York began translating the Yuzkerbuch, the book that was written by survivors after World War II, mostly in Hebrew and in Yiddish, a little bit in English sometimes, that was written about the city of Radom. And the local newspaper received the translations into Polish, and they would run it, serial, every week. You know, stories about this family that lived here and that family that lived there. At Easter, they didn't run it. They hadn't received the email from New York. And they began receiving calls. What happened? Why can't we hear about what's going on with our Jews? So the thing that is quite hard for people to understand is that if you ask people in an ADL sort of structured survey, what do you think of Jews? I don't know any Jews. They're scary, suspicious, etc. Classic meat for, you know, they all hate Jews. But if you ask people, you know, about the local history, there's a tremendous interest. One of the things that I find fascinating is every time I go to a Rotary Club or to a city council meeting or to a church or
There or here?
in Poland, one of the things that people want to know is something about the history of their Jewish community. What did you bring that talks about the Jews that lived in our community? There is a Jewish community that I visited last year. Again, it's on the blogs. There's a Polish community that's west of Poznan. Now, Poznan is one of those cities that was on the border often between Germany and Poland. Mostly it was German. So this is already into the German area. This is in the area of what's known as Jelona Gura, and so forth. And every year when I go to visit, they're there to talk about the history of their Jewish community, and it's packed. There's no place to sit. People are curious. So one of the things I think is disconcerting for us is that there is this interest, this effort to restore the artifacts of Jewish life, to restore cemeteries, to restore most of the synagogues, if they still are standing, have been turned into community centers, their libraries, their public halls. But they try to retain the character of the fact that this was a synagogue. So there is this interest in preserving Jewish memory that is a profound part of what we experience. I'm going to stop because it's now 8:27, and we didn't do a systematic discussion of the essay, but I think we've touched on a number of the issues. And I think that it is kind of a summary statement. I think that one of the questions, as I look at Poland, is that Poland is like every other place in the world, in that there are people who are seeking to remember the past for the sake of remembering. And of course, we would judge that as an important and noble idea. There is at the other extreme, Poland has instances of people who are seeking to remember in order to forget. A very conscious attempt to say, okay, we did that. Now, let's move on. Let's move on. And somewhere in between, and of course these are all not what I call pure cases, but there is this mix of motivations. And certainly the middle one is remembering to benefit. The Krakow Music Festival is a tremendous tourist attraction, mostly tourists from Poland. Of the 40,000 or so people who come, about 35,000 of them are people from Poland. What draws them is kind of interesting because there is the music, there is the dancing, there is what is a very common European phenomenon in festivals, of going to festivals. We will make a stop on our way from Wrocław, which will be the most western part of our trip, in a city that was the city where Leo Beck, the rabbi that served what was then a part of Germany, in a town called Apollo. Apollo was the town that he served in, and it was the place where he wrote his first book.
That was in Berlin.
No. He was sentenced to Fresno, and then he left Fresno and came to Los Angeles. So he was the rabbi where he met his wife. And one of the things that that town is known for, besides Leo Beck, who was this larger-than-life figure that survived Theresienstadt, that was one of the few rabbis that stayed with his flock in Germany and didn't leave, stayed with him to the end and survived. The town is known as the place of these popular music festivals. So that the Krakow Festival is in some ways cloyingly Jewish.
Disneyland Jewish.
Disneyland Jewish. I don't know if anybody's ever gone to Hawaii. If you've had the misfortune of going to Hawaii and then going to one of the Mormon centers where they portray native culture.
The Hawaiian Cultural Center.
The Hawaiian Cultural Center. We did that, I have to admit it. And I mean, I was not comfortable in that situation. On the other hand, some of what's happened with our music and our culture is that it has had a new and different life. We, with the group that I took 2 years ago, were at a klezmer concert, not a festival, it was a concert, that was the most creative use of klezmer music and jazz that I've ever heard. And so that, yes, they're going to play some of the klezmer favorites, but at a moment not too far into the concert, it's going to be boring for them and for us. And then you see this cultural development that is Jewish and it's not Jewish. It's taking on a new life of its own.
And how many of the Jews in Poland versus the progressive movement are actually not Polish, but Russian or from different cultures from the Soviet bloc?
Until the last 2 years, Poland did not have a lot of people trying to come to it. Now we have large numbers of Ukrainians, Jews, who've tried to come into Poland. Poland is attractive by comparison to what's going on in Ukraine. And this fall, one of the people that we trained to be a prayer leader is a woman who's getting her master's degree in Hebrew letters at a Catholic school. And she's from Ukraine and has succeeded in being not only a wonderful prayer leader, but learning Hebrew at a very, very high level. The base of the Hebrew she learned was in Ukraine. But you know, she can't stay in Poland. She's there on a student visa.
She can't stay in Poland, or she can't stay in Poland.
She can't remain there.
Pardon?
She can't remain there.
She cannot remain.
No. I've got a question, logistically. Is there an airport in Wrocław?
There is an airport in Wrocław.
Are we entering Poland at Wrocław or Warsaw, as you told me?
We're entering in Warsaw and going directly to Wrocław.
But we're flying into Warsaw.
Correct. Now, one of the things I would say,
By bus.
since we're talking about,
By bus to Wrocław.
no, we're flying from Warsaw to Wrocław. We arrive in Warsaw and we fly to Wrocław. Wrocław is the Polish name for Breslau. Breslau.
Yes, I've got a relative there.
And Breslau,
My mother-in-law was born in
Not,
no,
So-
that's Wrocław.
So,
Wrocław.
are we
Where's
seeing-
that?
That's 400 miles east of the Polish border.
Okay.
I can't seem to get a definite reply from you. I want to meet my daughter in Poland.
Uh-huh.
So I want
Did you talk to
get-
the person from Ayelet this morning?
Yes, she called me, yes.
And did she send you a flyer?
Yes. But she told me she knows nothing about the riding in Warsaw. She knows about the riding in Wrocław. And I can't get it. So where must I meet my daughter? Where are we going?
Yeah.
You're not going to say.
So, first of all, don't worry. You'll meet your daughter. What I would recommend, and this is now up to you, maybe we can turn off the Ayelet people will help us